Hey, Miguel Iturrate back here on the CRP, and I'm joined by Devin Miller, and that means it's MMA time. The UFC on ESPN 4 card went down yesterday, and that's Saturday, July 20th. They were in San Antonio, Texas, and definitely a pretty sick set of happenings in the featured spot fights. And, three of them lasted a total of less than one round in totality, and then we had an absolute slobber knocker of a war in the final. So I'm going to let Devin start taking us through it. But Devin, let's start from the top. Rafael dos Anjos, still a superhero, but Leon Edwards, what did he just get done last night?
Well, I want to start with talking about actually with the loser here with RDA because RDA we've talked a little bit here recently on the CRP about the quote unquote gatekeeper role in these divisions. And I believe there's different levels to being a gatekeeper. I think there's like a gatekeeper into the top 10 and a gatekeeper into the top 5. And then there's gatekeepers into like title contention. When you look at RDA right now at welterweight, which this is a former lightweight champion, went up to welterweight, got ranked very high after he beat the former welterweight champion Robbie Lawler, and I believe his second fight in the division. Well, since then he's become like that final step gatekeeper. When you look at the three men that have managed to beat him at 170 pounds, those three men are at first was Colby Covington by a 5 round decision, then Kamaru Usman by a 5 round decision, and now Leon Edwards by a 5 round decision. So three men have been able to beat RDA in this division in 5 round, really very good fights. But all three fights are fights that he clearly lost. I would argue that this might have been the cleanest victory against him yet in this division with Leon Edwards. Kamaru might have been a little bit more. RDA might have taken a little bit more abuse in the Kamaru fight, but Leon Edwards looked very smooth and just technically, I thought, flawless last night. He was tying up when he needed to tie up. He was winning the wrestling. His striking looked incredibly fluid. And I think it's long time that Leon Edwards starts getting some recognition in this division. He's now on an 8-fight win streak in what I believe is the best division in the sport. And especially in the UFC, I think it's overtaken lightweight. And on top of that, I believe he is 10-1 in the UFC in his last 11 fights. That one lone loss was a decision loss to the current champion, Kamaru Usman. I think that there's an argument that Leon Edwards is the number 2 best welterweight in the world right now. And also, I think it's really important to note that he was the recipient of the 3-piece in the soda from Jorge Masvidal back in London.
That's a perfect setup for my next
And
set
with
of questions. I'll let you finish.
well, I was going to say with Jorge being has such a mountaintop of popularity at the moment, I think this sets up a perfect segue with a fight with Leon. It's just whether Jorge and the UFC wants to take that risk with Masvidal's name at such an all-time high.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you because now, well, there are a couple of scenarios here, and we may be off in fantasy land, but we talk a lot about the 165-pound division, and Masvidal's not going to be an easy cat to matchmake for right now because he's going to want his title shot. He's already said, "All right, you're not going to give me a title shot, give me Conor because I want to make the extra pop. I want the extra bill." So all of that makes sense. Now, I know that you love the idea of a 165-pound class. Could you do Leon Edwards and Jorge Masvidal for a 165-pound title, and then have Covington and Usman fight for them, or Usman just bump him to 175 and let him defend that belt? Is that a plausible scenario? Do you take that fight of your Masvidal? You've obviously, with the 3-piece, you kind of got to say he set it up for the future, right?
Yeah, I do. There's a lot to unpack there. I do think that Masvidal. We've talked a lot on here, Miguel. Me and you have done probably no joke, close to 10 podcasts where we've theorized about who Conor McGregor is going to fight if he returns. Well, now we've got the same kind of conversation going on, but it's not Conor McGregor. It's Jorge Masvidal. He's that big of a star now. Who's he going to fight next? It could be the title fight. It could be Conor's been rumored. It could be the winner of the Diaz Pettis fight. It could be Leon Edwards now. As for the 65 division, I think striking while the iron's hot would be a wise thing to do with Masvidal, especially how hot his name is right now. And I think a 65-pound division move would be good. I don't think it'd be Leon, though, because Leon looked pretty big last night. I think if they did do a 65 division, they would need to move welterweight to 75. That's what I've always said. I think Leon would be more in line to stay at 75 with the Usman and stuff and Covington's. It's just who would really be the matchup for Masvidal if they did that at 65. That I couldn't tell you. I think maybe a Nate Diaz if Nate Diaz can get through Anthony Pettis, and I think that's a great fight. But the thing with that,
what about Gastelum?
What?
What about a Gastelum?
I just don't think he can. I think he'd make it. I think he'd be a 75er.
Okay, yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm sorry, I'm off on my mind.
And he was struggling to make 70.
So no, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's my bad.
The thing with Leon that I think is going to hurt him about getting the fight with Masvidal is even in his call out after it, it's just he that seemed a little forced. You can tell he genuinely wants that fight. How could he not? He got completely embarrassed on live TV, and he's a great fighter. He's done way more to deserve. I mean, keep in mind, as much as I love Jorge Masvidal, I'm a big fan, and he has been spectacular in his last two finishes. Maybe in the short list of fighter of the year right now. Definitely on a career resurrection trajectory toward a title fight, potentially one of the biggest stars in the sport right now, no doubt about it. But he's still 2-2 in his last 4 fights. And here you got Leon Edwards 10-1 in his last 11 and on an 8-fight win streak. So you've got definitely on merit alone, Leon Edwards is probably more deserving of a title fight. But we both know that's not the only thing that factors in. You've got a huge name in Jorge Masvidal. So I think
let's finish the fantasy. If you were to initiate the 165-pound class and you're going to put George in that title fight, who steps into the cage on the other side?
I think either Khabib moves up or you do like a Nate Diaz. I don't think you can do Conor because he's coming off a loss.
Nate Diaz is coming off like 4 losses, right?
Who?
Nate?
Well, Nate is coming off the Conor decision, and before that he beat Conor.
Okay, let me just go look. Because his record isn't title worthy in recent outings, and he's also been way inactive. So, but yeah, but when you're talking about now you're trying to make a money fight, Nate's in the conversation.
Nate Masvidal would be a title worthy money fight for sure.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, he's 3-4 in his last 7. So,
yeah.
Like Masvidal, if they were being rated at, like normal fighters, they probably have some more work to do. So very interesting. So a lot of repercussions there, but basically, you think Leon Edwards has shoved his way into title contention. He may be sitting there waiting for the winner of Usman's next fight. Now, what's up with Usman? Is Usman still banged up? I saw some rumors where, was it Covington calling him out for faking injuries?
Yeah, but that's, I think, just Colby just talking. I think he knows that Usman wants that fight as much as anybody. I mean, why wouldn't he? I mean, that's a big money fight. Usman would definitely be the favorite over both Colby and Masvidal, and both those fights are money fights for him. He just went through and just completely dominated Tyron Woodley for 5 rounds. I think Kamaru Usman's going to be a favorite against anybody they put him in there with right now. And he's already got a win over Leon Edwards when they were younger in their career. But keep in mind, I think Leon Edwards is 27, maybe 28 years old right now. And when they fought, he would have probably been about 23, 24. I mean, this was a while ago. So he's 27 right now. And when he fought Usman was back in 2015. So, yeah, he was 23, 24 years old, like I thought, when they fought the first time. So he's definitely come of age, and he's coming into his prime. I think Rocky Edwards is going to be a legit contender. He just beat the number 4 ranked guy last night in RDA. And that was Masvidal's big criticism when they asked him about this fight. He said, beat a guy in the top 10 before you come talking about fighting me. Well, he just beat the number four ranked guy. He's going to be right there in the top 5 with Masvidal. I think like I was getting at, I think the only thing that could hurt Leon about getting a fight with Masvidal, even though I think that's the fight to make, is, and I think if Covington can get through Lawler in a few weeks, he should fight Usman first. Is that a big enough name right now for Masvidal? Coming off the huge Askren fight, what do you think?
No, I think Masvidal, you got to take into consideration a couple of things. I think, one of the things we've given Masvidal a lot of credit for is how real he is, right? And I can tell you that he really doesn't change that much behind the scenes. And part of it is, and I've match made 10 fights for him, right? Part of it is you could joke around with him, and he was a young kid, and he could joke and stuff like that. But there is a very serious side to him when it comes down to career pathing and trying to make money and getting paid, because his options are limited. He needs this. He wants this, and that hasn't changed. Now, he's talking about making $1 million and putting his kids through college. That's a great. I'm so happy for him that he's there, and not fighting for $10,000 or less, But the point is I think to motivate him properly, I think you got to get the right opponent, and I think they're going to be finding out that that he's serious when he says pay me or give me the opponent. He'll come in and fight anybody they want, but they're going to have to pay him the same as they're going to pay him for one of the other big money fights. So why not just do the big money fight? I think that's going to be his stance.
I agree, and that's why he definitely wants paid and deserves to be paid, because I've been criticized.
That's a slippery. It is a slippery slope for a promotion, though, because like he mentioned in the post-fight interview, he goes, "I fought Eve Edwards 10 years ago. Hello, I was the matchmaker for that one." The UFC doesn't have to pay him for that. You know what I mean? In terms of, he probably didn't get enough at the time. I don't remember what the pay was, but he probably deserved more for it, and that's part of it. But the UFC doesn't need to pay that. So they need to strike while the iron is hot, as you've been pointing out. And that's it. Just go grab your money now, baby. Pay everybody.
Yeah, and with that in mind, with him wanting to be paid, that's why I lean more toward, I think, number one, if Robbie Lawler shocks the world in a couple weeks and pulls off an upset over Colby Covington, we know it's going to be Usman and Masvidal if that's the case. If Colby loses, it doesn't matter how he loses. If Colby loses the first week of August to Robbie Lawler, it's going to be Usman and Masvidal, because that's the only other fight that I could see hindering Masvidal from getting the title fight would be his teammate Colby Covington, right, who's way more deserving. He's the number one contender. We all know about it. That's really what I think the big holdup is. Is going to be, we're going to wait to see what that goes on. If that plays out like I think it's going to, as much as I love Robbie Lawler and would love to see the upset, I think we're going to see Colby and Usman, and that's why I lean more toward, after that, we're probably going to see, I think we're going to see the winner of Pettis and Diaz fight, George. And the reason is keep in mind, Pettis is Ben Askren's teammate. Anthony Pettis is a former champion. He was on the cover of the Wheaties box. He was a WEC champion, a UFC champion. Yeah. And Anthony Pettis and Jorge Masvidal just did a grappling match together. So there's some story there. And then with Nate Diaz, it sells itself. I mean, he's a huge, since the Conor McGregor fights, he's become a massive draw. And even though, as you said, his resume, the same as George, probably doesn't play out well enough to merit title fight worthy yet. They're there, but not necessarily, as deserving as somebody like Leon Edwards or Colby Covington or Kamaru Usman or these guys. They're still the bigger names. And I think that's why I'm going to lean more toward that. But I could see them making the Leon fight. I just think it's very dangerous for how big of a star that they have right now with Jorge to put him in there with Leon Edwards.
Yeah, I mean, if they wanted to do something like do it in London and really, pay Masvidal so that he's there and happy and ready to fight, then should Leon pull the win off, and he might still enter that fight favored, right? Especially in London. You've made yourself a massive star, and they need something like that. So, it could go either way. All this welterweight talk has been as a repercussion, but the bottom line is Leon Edwards got a big win over Rafael Dos Anjos last night on the UFC on ESPN 4, and he's heading to title contention, but he's still waiting for the welterweight division to shake out some old storylines. Heading down the rest of the card.
Real quick, real
Go
quick.
ahead. I'll let you wrap up. Go ahead.
You just mentioned a point that I definitely I definitely want to comment on that I thought was a really good point that I haven't thought of. Is Leon's a Brit. We need to remember that, and he fighting Masvidal in the UK would be smart because keep in mind, when did the three-piece in the soda so famously happen after the postcard? It was when Masvidal main evented against Terrence Hill. The UFC tried for 3 years, close to 3 years, to try to get their new British star in Darren Till. When in reality, they should have probably been throwing their eggs in the basket of Leon Edwards. He's
Yeah.
the one who's probably more likely to be a big UK star. So that was actually a very good point. I could see them doing that because they want the new Michael Bisping. They want a new big star over there. And man, there's some Masvidal would enter that fight so hated in that country because they're very loyal to their hometown.
And it even sets up a Till versus Edwards rivalry if the cards shake out in that match the right way. So that's an option, and that comes up. But once again, like I said, George, is that a top tier Conor McGregor type of fight in London? The UFC'd have to try to blow it up, but again, like the sponsor checks and stuff like that. I mean, the contract's a contract, but the bells and whistle money that comes in on the side, George is going to want to see a bump. He's going to want to see people wearing the three-piece T-shirt. You know what I mean? So anyway, let's head down the rest of the card because we had some lightning fast action here. Walt Harris, I guess, Walt, with all due respect to the big ticket, it looks like, he had journeyman written all over him from the beginning of his career because he was a guy who took some losses early on in the UFC and he'd win and lose and bounce back and forth. At this point, though, he's on his way up and he's got his second first-round knockout. This time he took out veteran Alexei Oleinik, a very impressive resume, but over 40, and this is now his second loss. But you got to give Walt Harris some credit. 12 seconds in, he just finished the fight.
Yeah, he looked lightning fast, and Oleinik looked just sluggishly slow right off the bat. You just summed it up in your introduction on this perfectly because Walt Harris did have kind of a journeyman written all over him. I mean, I remember when he stepped up on short notice. I think it was literally the day of or the day before he stepped up and fought Fabricio Verdum when Verdum's opponent fell out and got armbarred in one round. I mean, it was like in a 1-minute fight, just taken down and submitted within a minute. And I remember it just looked like, oh well, he just got thrown in there last minute against an elite guy, and Walt Harris looks kind of scary. Maybe this could be threatening, and then you go out there and it's like, oh well, he's not elite. But now you see this guy, and it's like, wow. He looked very impressive last night, and it looks like he's just getting better. He's got a 13-7 record, so he's definitely not had a flawless tenure. But I kind of like those stories. We've seen it with Anthony Smith. We've seen it with guys in the past who sometimes I feel you know this as a boxing guy, Miguel, and I'm sure that you have noticed this is a big difference in MMA compared to boxing. Is number one, MMA doesn't have the amateur circuit, the amateur structure that boxing has, and so they don't get the experience there like they do in professional boxing. Then when you go into pro boxing compared to MMA, you see these guys with 25-0 records in pro boxing because they're being brought along slowly, methodically, carefully, getting ring time, getting experience. You don't see that at MMA. You see guys getting thrown in there. Greg Hardy in his fourth fight been on all main cards on UFC fight nights. You know what I'm saying? So when you see these guys
they're definitely learning on the job, right?
Yeah,
I think that's what you're getting at. And I think with Walt Harris, I think they were smart to keep him on the roster because some guy, if you're a welterweight or a featherweight and had the early part of his career record wise or early part of his UFC run record wise, they probably wouldn't be with the UFC, but they stuck with the heavyweight. And the bottom line is what happens there is now you put together a run where you've been in the UFC now for 3, 4, 5 years. Now you're a pro. Now you are a guy that is just doing this. And Walt Harris showed a little flashes of the benefits of that yesterday. He actually, if you do some quick math, he's probably making pretty good buck per hour after knocking Olenek out in 12 seconds. And we had another fast knockout of Greg Hardy. Juan Adams was not happy after this one.
No, he wasn't. But man, that's why you can't just lay there on a single leg and not move, and just taking repeated shots when the ref's telling you to move. I'm not a fan of Greg Hardy. We've been over that. I think he's been pushed way too fast. I don't understand the UFC's obsession with marketing him the way they have. But I will say this, and I think you'll agree with me, Miguel, from where we started on here talking together when I joined the CRP back in January. Greg Hardy was on one of the first cards that we covered together. And compare that to what we saw last night, and he looked like a legit heavyweight last night.
Yeah, I know. I agree. The thing is again, now you got a guy who, yes, he got his bump and start, early with the UFC and with his background in football and stuff. I'm thinking he's an athlete who's got some resources, who's got some backers and things like that. So you get to start at a little bit higher level. And, now that he's dedicated to it, yeah, we should see him come along pretty fast, right? And that's the hope, I guess, in the UFC's ballgame. The thing is, a lot of his personal story brings up so many negatives that, the kind of kid gloves treatment is really distasteful. And that's I think, what gets under people's skin. But if they can get him, to 20 fights, people will stop talking about all that, and hopefully Greg Hardy, doesn't get, the crazy Greg Hardy pop up from, when he was younger and stuff like that. And all good, I guess. The bottom line is BJ Penn's first fight was in the UFC too. They're fighters all throughout the history of this sport where, they come in with privilege.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a good point that he probably does have some resources behind him, some money that he's being able to get some good training. And, well, but one thing I'm just analyzing him as a person. I mean, take out all the emotion, remove the fact that he is he's had domestic battery charges, and he's, not a very likable fella. But he is, number one, he's embracing the whole villain role, like, to a T. He doesn't care anymore. He's like, yeah, hate me, whatever. Give me that publicity. I'm fine with it. And on top of that, he was facing a very heavy-handed big man himself last night in Juan Adams. Didn't intimidate him. He was right there in his face throwing bombs, and it definitely seemed to be the better athlete. Put the pressure on, and got him out of there within a minute. And he seemed very relaxed going in. What's up? He seemed mentally very strong this week. And keep in mind, I've always said these guys that are coming in from other sports, whether it's an actual combat sport like boxing or kickboxing or wrestling or even football, that have this kind of competitive background, they tend to be very competitive people. And
yep. The bottom line is if you have the discipline, and in football they do, it's like, all right, this is he's a defensive end, right? So you're going to come through the middle and fight through. Okay, now we're going to practice that reps 100 times. That's jiu-jitsu. That's what they do. You practice the move, and now you practice it again, and then make an adjustment, and you learn what you do from there and stuff like that. So at least he's had the discipline to achieve at a high level in another sport. And if he's able to use that, it'll benefit him here. And then the other part is because football can be a high-profile sport, and he was high-profile in the sport, he's camera ready. You know what I mean? It's like not everybody, has that gift of being able to, look at a camera and play the bad boy. A lot of people got to come along and do it. And, he's coming along. It's just, like I said, on the fourth fight, there's no reason why he needed to be ahead of veterans Ben Rothwell and Andre Arlovski on this card.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
How'd you see that fight? Unfortunately, I did a lot of early matchmaking for Ben Rothwell as well, and he's a guy that I enjoyed watching his career success and getting to the point, where he is. Unfortunately, in 2016, he left the UFC for a little bit. I believe he had a steroid suspension, but I did have expectations for him that were pretty high when he came back. At the end of the day, he's really was just at that point entering his late 30s. He's still, huge for the weight class, and he's been around. He's another guy approaching 50 fights and stuff like that. So I had a lot of expectations, and he's got 2 flat performances in a row, and Arlovski, what are we going to do with Arlovski? It's like this guy. Every time you think, all right, he's shot. He's lost. Arlovski had been on a run where he was 2-7 in the UFC, and then he had the no contest with Walt Harris, then another loss, and then he put together. Now this is his first win. This could have been Arlovski's gone from the UFC, and Ben Rothwell sort of gave it away. How do you see this?
I think you just summed it up perfectly. And when you got somebody like Andrei Arlovski, you're talking about a guy who, I mean, this man was a champion in the UFC 13 years ago. I mean, he's been in there with everybody that I think has ever fought in this division in a high profile organization. And he clearly doesn't need to keep fighting. He clearly is not at the highest level anymore. But he's just somebody that's just born to fight and loves to do what he's doing. And he goes in there and picks up another win. And he's staying in there at 40 years old. And he's still 3-3 in his last 6 fights. And Ben Rothwell, as you mentioned, I think he was robbed. We mean you both thought he was robbed against Blagoy Ivanov. I thought he won that fight. I definitely thought he lost to Arlovski last night, but I'm a little disappointed in him too because I mean this is a man that has wins over Alistair, over knockout wins over knockout win over Alistair Overeem, and a win over Mitch Rion and Barnett. So he's beaten good guys, been in there for a long time. Went to a decision with Junior Dos Santos, and I mean I expected him to win this fight. I would have called him to beat Arlovski. So I think this was a disappointing setback for him. It's not.
Arlovski's a guy who should be beatable, right? You should be able to if you can get him to the ground. There's a game plan there because he's never been a ground fighter. But he's a very, very, very good stand-up fighter. And if you want to mess around with him there, so be it. You're doing it at your own risk because a 40-year-old man can still knock you out. And Arlovski's, with all that experience, and he's learned to protect his chin, he's still dangerous if you're going to mess around with him. And again, Rothwell gets, I don't know. He never takes the easy path, it seems. So he's now 0-2, and we'll see how he bounces back. And with the Pitbull, we'll see good matchmaking. We could still see a couple of fights more out of him. And continuing here on the main card, we had Dan Hooker and James Vick. This was another one of those first-round blowouts. Vick out in 2 minutes and a half at the hands of Dan Hooker. How'd you see this? This is Vick's third loss in a row for a guy that at one point was highly touted.
Yeah, I need to get a lot better in making sure that we're on schedule and doing our wage rage picks because I would have definitely picked Dan Hooker to win this fight, and it was that was a beautiful, beautiful left hook, and James Vick, yeah, this is a guy that was he got put in there with Justin Gaethje, and people thought that he might be on a fast track to the top 5 to true contendership in this hot division. Gets knocked out by Gaethje, loses a decision to Felder, then just gets knocked out by Hooker. I'm not sure where Vick goes from here. 3 fights in a row. He's got the frame, he's got the skills, but he's not moving. He's still not developing correctly. He's not moving his head well. Dan Hooker, continues to be a really game fighter, great stand up, and man, dude, every time I think of Dan Hooker now, I think of that beating he sustained earlier this year to Edson Barboza. Barboza kicked the crap out of him for 3 rounds and then dropped him. But this was a very impressive comeback. He was saying that he wants on the card in October with Adesanya and Whitaker as the main event. I believe that's going to be on Australia. So I think that he's earned himself another top 15 opponent for that card in October. I think maybe the winner. I think we might be seeing him against the other lightweight winner of the night on the night. That was kind of controversial. I think we might be seeing him in October against Alexander Hernandez.
And Hernandez won a unanimous decision against Francisco Trinaldo. And it's interesting, the way these UFCs go, especially for the live card and live audience. Every single fight went the distance until Hooker and Vick, and then they had 3 fights end early in the first round. Hernandez and Trinaldo was the last of those unanimous of those decision fights. And do you think the judges got it wrong?
I did. I was leaning toward Trinaldo winning this fight, but Hernandez is tough. I mean, they've been trying to push him for a while now. I really do. We talked earlier this year about how I definitely think they brought Cerrone in to try to get to make a name off him with Alexander Hernandez, who came in, got a few big wins, got ranked, was looking like a young prospect, and then Cerrone really took him to school and set that back a little bit. And then he comes in and has a really tough fight with a tough vet and Francisco Trinaldo, who's been very underrated for a long time. But Hernandez is still young, 26 years old, and he's now 3-1 in the UFC with that lone loss being that Cerrone loss. So I think he looked improved. He looked a little bit more measured, like he's fighting a little bit more with his head than what he did with the Cerrone fight. And I think I think that definitely humbled him a little bit. But this was a close decision, I thought.
And Trinaldi had pulled off a 7-fight winning streak in the UFC, and now he's 2-3 in his last 5 fights. And that's the UFC on ESPN 4. Any other fights you want to recap? That's the main card. Anything on the undercard you want to go over, or look for it on another podcast?
No, I think we covered the high notes on this. I wouldn't have wanted to do anything less, but I think we covered the high notes. I guess the only other thing that I would say is number one, we got to give a big shout out to Ray Borg. I thought that was a very emotional win for him to come back, and his post fight speech was very emotional. Ray Borg had a lot of personal trouble with his sick son, who went through a lot, and for him to come back after facing some adversity and dealing with some trials in his own personal life, and give a shout out to all those who have been in the same situation, and give that win in their honor. I thought that was really powerful. Also, it was a little sad to see Jennifer Maya defeat Roxanne Modafferi. Roxanne, I know you have some history with her, Miguel. Um, she was up there in contendership, number 5 in the division, and Jennifer Maya is a very tough girl though, and
Well, it was a rematch, and the thing about Rox is she's a competitor, so she'll try to learn from the loss as long as they'll have her and stuff. And she's still fun and she's still happy. And as far as Ray Borg is concerned, you know, I mean, I don't know, but when I hear stories like that, I'll give you a similar story from the boxing world, like Daniel Jacobs fought Canelo. Daniel Jacobs had beaten cancer, and now Ray, he's overcoming tragedies within his own family and stuff like that, and issues, and this guy's still 25 years old. This is somebody I can back. This is somebody I want to watch. So let's move him up on the card and give some respect to the bantamweight division anyway. Shout out to him for a nice performance. He took out Gabriel Silva there. And as you mentioned, Jennifer Maya, we had Raquel Pennington pick up a win on the undercard as well, if you want to focus on the last of the women's fights.
yeah, I mean Rocky Pennington. She's kind of in that position right now where she's just in a division. It's kind of the same thing with Jennifer Maya and Roxanne Modafferi, where they're just in divisions where the champion is just so good. We saw Rocky Pennington go in there against um, Amanda Nunez, and I, the thing that sticks out to me the most in that fight was just her telling her corner going into that 5th round that she didn't want to fight anymore, and then throwing her out there just to go get finished in the 5th round by Amanda Nunez when she was clearly already a beaten fighter, which was ridiculous. But then she comes back and loses to Durand to me. But she's still, I mean, I think she's a top 5 bantamweight. It's just, I think she
Yep,
pulled off a good.
there's tears to the weight class. And unfortunately, what happened here with Aldana is the UFC would have benefited to have Aldana break through, because that would have given her a 4-fight winning streak and a little bit of a fresh face approaching the top of the division. Still, anybody walking in against Nunez, I mean, you might as well, count on a 4-figure, odds at the books.
Yeah, that's really sums it up. Is just those divisions right now with Nunez and Shevchenko. Man, I mean, those are probably the 2 most dominant champions right now. That it's just so hard to see anybody who's going to really be competitive with them in the near future. And I think there's a good chance we see the 3rd fight. I just don't know why Nunez would want to do it, but it's I mean, what she has to gain from already beating her twice. But I think that might be the only fight worth making besides Nunez and Cyborg or Nunez and Durandamy, but Nunez beat them all. So I stick to my I don't see where Nunez really has to go other than just taking risk at this point because she's already done everything she needs to do. So that's what comes to mind with Rocky Pennington is just this division is just so dominated by Amanda Nunez.
There's an Amanda Nunez versus Uriah Faber joke in there somewhere, but I'll close out the pod. I'm Miguel Iturrate, and that's Devin Miller. This has been our UFC on ESPN 4 recap, and we went over the main fights. And good show overall. What do you give it? A B, B plus?
I think a B is fine.
Yeah, a B is fair. A lot of decisions until some mayhem on the main card that saw 3 knockouts, and after that, we had a slobber knocker of a main event, as we've said. So I'm Miguel Iturrate. That's Devin Miller signing off here at the CRP.